Hello.
Everyone.
Before we start, I just have to say, Jose, that I'm so happy that Meridian is in Rio.
Same here.
I've been to Meridian, I think maybe all of them. And for the first time, I'm at home and I'm at Meridian. So it's really great.
We made the travel easy for you. We might make it a little bit longer for most folks in the audience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But thank you and welcome to all of you guys. It's really a pleasure to be here today talking with Jose. And Jose, you've just stepped into the role
Right.
of President and Chief Growth Officer at SDF, right? So, what are you excited about? What is special about this moment, and what do you think it means for the way that Stella is going?
What excited me about coming here, I think that we're a moment now in which a technology that is still young but already mature is meeting from the regulatory and from the broad market acceptance the moment in which enterprises want to really get into this. I live in North America, and I think that is very clear there that the regulatory environment has changed quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to work for PayPal, and I think that PayPal was one of the pioneers on the fintech side of adoption of digital assets, and they launched their stablecoin way before it was fashionable to do that. You would not imagine how many conversations I had over the last 6 or 9 months about traditional financial institutions who are saying, okay, this digital asset thing is here to stay. And how do we look at that? What is enterprise grade? What is ready? What is not ready? What are the regulatory risks that we are taking? And I think that the Stellar is in a very, very privileged place of being able to be that conduit between a battle-tested blockchain that has been around for a long time, that is purpose-built for everyday financial services, and that has that respectability and that ability to engage with the enterprise side of it. So one of the places where I will spend most of my time is making sure that there is more enterprise adoption. Stellar has been super successful in the past in bringing names like MoneyGram and Franklin Templeton and Wisdom Tree. PayPal announced that they were deploying their stablecoin on Stellar. And the measure of success for me is going to be if a year from now we have 10, 20, 30 other names that are choosing to deploy Stellar on the institutional side. I think that's where we get extreme distribution. You'll hear me talk a lot about building for extreme distribution, building for scale.
Yeah.
How do we get products that can be taken to the masses?
So let me follow up on this infrastructure idea that I know that you have mentioned that quite a few times. How does that fit with the enterprise, ambitions in regards to blockchains and so on? So there's a lot of conversation about infrastructure everywhere, like digital public infrastructure, like the Brazilian PIX. How does that fit with the enterprise world?
So I've been in fintech for a long time. And if you look at the evolution of fintech, for the last 20, maybe for the last 30 years, most of the innovation that has happened on fintech has been either on the UX side, on better interfaces for consumers to interact with, or on fraud prevention, how to detect bad actors in card-not-present environments. But the pipes to move value have stayed the same for the last more than 30 years, even 50. It's funny, the expression for a bank-to-bank transfer in English is a wire transfer. And it's called a wire transfer because initially they were set on telegram wires. So that was technology was 100 years old. When you think of what does it take for infrastructure to be bank grade and enterprise grade, as an industry, traditionally blockchain talks a lot about some of the shiny objects. And we talk a lot about speed and we talk a lot about cost. And Stellar has incredible strengths in speed and cost. I think that the sad news is that speed and cost are not enough. When people are going to be, when folks are going to be on the enterprise side looking at a blockchain where they want to deploy, or looking at a project that they want to integrate into their interfaces, they're going to be looking absolutely at speed and cost. But beyond that, they're going to be looking at uptime. So Danelle was earlier on stage talking about 99.99% uptime on the Stellar network for 10 years. I don't think there is another blockchain out there who can claim 4 nines of uptime in 10 years. That's going to be something that institutions are going to be looking at. People are going to be looking at compliance, because your blockchain can go out for a couple of hours if you're dealing in NFTs or something that is not time sensitive. But if you're doing billions of payments, You cannot have an outage that is 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. You cannot go dark for that amount of time. So emphasize uptime, emphasize compliance, a lot of the things that are built by design on the Stellar blockchain, things like trust lines. I think that that's something that we should be shouting from the rooftops. So that next layer of scalability of, hey, let's talk beyond speed and cost, because people are not going to care that much about whether this is 0.0004 or 0.004. The cost is low enough, the throughput is high enough for most of the commercial use cases. Uptime and compliance, I think that's going to be the big differentiator.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have questions, feel free to send them over the app, because I have my little tablet here. I can pick your question, so feel free to do that. In the US, you have for instance, the Genius Act approved. That has brought a lot of attention, especially in regards to Stellar. There's a lot of institutions leaning in. So do you see that there is an increased interest? What is going on, do you think?
I think that the US has caught up with where most of the markets were already. So the US was notoriously behind in the regulation of stablecoins and in general in crypto. The Genius Act was an endeavor that took years for a lot of people working really hard to make sure that it was a bipartisan legislation that could pass in Congress. I gave testimony in Congress in February, and many of us were part of that effort. And it has really changed the attitude in the US. If you're in the US now, it feels like there's the tip of the spear. But quite frankly, what has happened is that it has caught up with where Europe was already, and many of the other markets were there. Obviously, given the size of the US and the influence that it has, it was very important, and especially because most of the stable coins that you see today, they are still denominated in US dollars. But hopefully that's going to be the push that the market needed for many of those institutional players to adopt blockchains, and especially to remove that kind of veil of uncertainty on the regulatory side. And traditional financial institutions are not very good at taking regulatory risks, and they should not. And removing that regulatory risk from the equation is giving that boost to the ecosystem in the US. Many of the other markets were already there.
Yeah. Dollar dominance, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's around 99% of stable coins, right? Euro is 1%, maybe.
It's
So
very small.
I see that as actually an opportunity, including for countries like Brazil to step into that market. But question I have for you, how do you balance cutting edge innovation, new products, new design, especially in the network of Stellar, with the stability that companies actually look, especially if you are in the financial sector?
So it's a delicate balance, and it's a little bit sometimes you need to go to the extremes. For the enterprise grade use cases, stability is super important.
Mm-hmm.
What is the problem that you have is that you get too accommodating and you get a little bit lazy.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that we need to understand, and this is not blockchain specific, but it applies to technology more broadly, is that to some degree, progress requires pressure. So it is important that I spend a lot of time, and I'm sure that you spend a ton of time as well, in rooms where people are asking, why do we need a stable coins if we have X? So we live in the best of possible worlds. We don't need the stable coins because we have, you fill the blank. We have PICs. We don't need the stable coins. We have ACH transfers. We don't need the stable coins. Well, actually, it's not on the side of the regulator to say why you can do something. I think the regulator is there to protect the public and give reasons why something is not ready and should not be done. But the use case is not a prerequisite for something to be adopted. The community should come with the use cases. The regulation is there to protect the public. And in many cases, we should not take for granted that innovation leads to decentralization. In the history of technology, in many cases, innovation actually leads to centralization. That's what happened in the first generation of the internet. And I don't think that any of us started to work on Web3 to come up with a list of the Magnificent Seven that has just a list of different names. So it's important that we balance that enterprise adoption and stability and uptime with still pushing hard for decentralization and making sure that there is an open layer of Web3 that is non-excludable, where I can open a wallet without having to be opening an account with a search engine or with a payment provider, and that open free infrastructure still exists. And that will take conscious effort. Even you see today that everybody wants to build a layer one, and there should be multiple layer ones. Some of them are going to be owned by more captive audiences, and I think it's totally fine that crypto exchanges have layer ones, and stablecoin issuers have layer ones, and payment providers have layer ones, and search engines have layer ones. I just want to make sure that they are not the only layer ones that exist.
And because you're in Brazil, and we actually had a lot of fintech representatives here. We had Roberto Campos Neto from Nubank now. We had Priscila Faro just before us, speaking on behalf of Mercado Pago. We have Carol Conway coming from PagSeguro. Do you think Stella can play a role in this ecosystem? Because there's a lot of excitement in Latam as a whole about fintechs, right? What are the role of blockchains and Stellar in particular?
One of the things, and one of the reasons that I am also like you, so happy that we are doing this Meridian in Brazil, is that sometimes when you listen to folks in the US or in Europe talking about payments, some of those folks that would say, why do we need the stable coins if we have X? They would say, oh, well, this only works in places where the financial system is broken and infrastructure doesn't work. And there are sometimes very patronizing versions of a ton of ignorance about how the payment systems in some of other markets work. A ton of the innovation that has happened in the last years in payments has come from places like Brazil. Pix was world-class innovation that was developed, and the role that Governor Campos Neto did when he was there on Realidad was world-leading. And there are places, you go to some places like the India stack and what has happened with UPI in India, or Spain, in Mexico.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I think it's so important that we are here is that we're here to learn, we're here to engage with the ecosystem. I think that it takes a healthy dose of humility to come and learn about what everybody in the Brazilian ecosystem is doing, explain what we have to offer, and let the community build on it. I think it's more important, and it would be way better if many of the folks who are building in places like North America and Europe spend more time in Latin America and in Brazil, because there is a lot of very real innovation that has happened here. And the bleeding edge in payments has been happening here more than it has happened in other places.
Yeah. And talking about Meridian, if we come back together 1 year from now, and actually the next location for Meridian is going to be announced tomorrow.
Yes.
I don't know where it is. I'm really upset. I should have known that.
I do.
But anyways, someone kept me out of the loop. Should I be worried about that? But anyways. But what should we expect in terms 1 year from now of what success looks like, especially considering this tele-network?
I think that you should hold us accountable to the following, which if you think of a barbell, when you're lifting weights, you have two weights and a bar that connects. I think that the two weights on our side are on one side the developer ecosystem. There's a very vibrant developer ecosystem on the Stellar side. We are seeing active developers on Stellar growing at 50%, 40% year on year, when overall blockchain developers are growing at 5%. So the developer base is growing 8 times faster than blockchain, and we want to continue to see those projects, many of them in the room today, definitely in the conference, that continue to generate that part, because that's the cutting edge, and that's, as we said, that's something that progress requires pressure, and the pressure will come from the developer side. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is that enterprise adoption. We want to add 10, 20, 30 names to that list of enterprises who are building on the Stellar side. And then the bar is infrastructure. So a big part of what we do in the foundation is to contribute to the code base of Stellar and continue to build that infrastructure. And this is what's called the Red Queen syndrome, right? It takes all the running you can do to meet the same place. The technology never sleeps, and it's very important that we can continue to provide infrastructure so that all of you can continue to build on it.
That's absolutely fantastic. With all that, please help me to thank Jose for being here with us, and see you in next Meridian, wherever it is. Thank you.
Thanks so much.